No speakers? Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to call the finance meeting to order, please. Doug, are there any public comments this morning?
No, sir, there are none.
No public comments, okay. Would you please, well, the first thing we need is the approval of the minutes of our March 23rd meeting. Second, we have a proposal and a second, please. All in favor? Any opposed? The minutes are so approved. Doug, would you comment on the committee work plan?
There's no change to the work plan today, sir?
Okay. And why don't you go right into Budget Watch, please.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to focus on operating results through March and subsidy results through April. I'm going to start with the revenue. For the month, passenger revenues were $11 million or 2.4% favorable to budget. New York City Transit was 2.8% favorable, mostly due to higher average fares, while the commuter railroads were close to budget. The good news is this offset a portion of the combined revenue losses from January and February that were experienced because of some of the poor weather and the Metro-North Valhalla collision that occurred in February. As a result of the favorable March results, the unfavorable year-to-date passenger revenue variance was reduced to $28 million or 2.1%. Toll revenues actually had a very good, strong month in March, $5 million or 3.9% favorable, and bringing the year-to-date variance to a favorable $6.5 million or 1.7% year-to-date. That's based on higher than anticipated traffic levels, particularly in March. Staying within operating results, moving to expenses, they were on target for the month. Year-to-date, they're $24 million or 1% favorable, reflecting timing-related variances as well as lower fuel and fringe benefit expenses. They were partially offset by some of the higher weather-related overtime expenses that we have experienced. March year-to-date debt service costs were $26 million or 4% favorable, but a lot of that was due to timing, although some of that was real savings due to lower variable rates. Moving to subsidies, the big story continues to be real estate transaction taxes. They continue to remain strong. Overall, real estate transaction taxes were $17 million favorable in April, which increased the year-to-date variance to $127 million favorable, or 37%. We have PBT, petroleum business taxes through April were $16 million favorable. Payroll mobility taxes, however, were $27 million or 25% unfavorable. Year-to-date results are now $18 million or 3.5% unfavorable. So if you were to look at subsidies in total, really the PBT and the PMT kind of offset each other. The real estate are sort of the story. They're favorable. So to look at overall results, I would say they're on target for the month, again, due to the favorable real estate transaction taxes. Year-to-date, favorable again because of the strong real estate tax collections. Favorable debt service costs, but a lot of that may be timing. So overall, combined subsidies were on target with the exception of the real estate. Operating results were basically on budget. Really what falls out is the fact that we're basically on budget, but we're helped by those real estate taxes. Any questions?
Yeah, just so the committee knows, I've asked Doug and Bob to prepare. The overtime is still very concerning and actually getting worse. And when we talk about weather, we had, if you remember, really bad first quarter in 2014 also, and there seems to be no improvement in the overtime, which, as you know, not only affects our budget here in actual dollars, but has pension going forward. So I've asked Doug and Bob at the May meeting to prepare a review again, like we did last year, of the overtime, and we'll see where we go from there. But that's not good, and it's the one thing that, if you look at the whole expenses and revenue, it's the one thing that really jumps out of the page that is not a good thing. We don't know. That's why we want to really take a look at the review, because this is getting really expensive now. I mean, you got $200 million worth of overtime in the first quarter against the budget of 155, and that 155 was a huge increase from 13 to 14, so it's getting worse, Andrew. So we're going to have to sit down and take a look at this, especially before we do the interim forecast in July, the revised budget. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. Any other questions on Budget Watch? So moving on to Finance Watch, Pat McCoy is going to take that.
Good afternoon. Finance Watch appears on page 20 of your committee materials today. We have two items to report. The first is a diesel fuel hedge that was executed on March 25th. This was for 2.9 million gallons of ULSD. The winning bid was provided by Merrill Lynch Commodities at an all-in price of $1.91 gallon. We did have other bids from our other active counterparties. That was Goldman Sachs, J. Aron, and J.P. Morgan Ventures Energy Corporation. This hedge covers the period from March 2016 through February 2017. So again, it's just our ongoing monthly fuel hedge program. Next, we just wanted to report that we do have an upcoming transaction. This will be $250 million for MTA Bridges and Tunnels. This will be the TBTA General Revenue Bond Series 2015A. This is, again, $250 million. $100 million of it will be used to repay the ban that TBTA entered into last year. That ban is coming due and needs to be paid off. And then additional proceeds just for ongoing existing approved capital work. The transaction will be senior managed by Loop Capital Markets, and the special co-senior manager will be Academy Securities. And I would just note that Loop Capital Markets is one of our MBE managers, and Academy Securities is a service-disabled veteran-owned firm. So we're, utilizing, all of the firms in our bracket on a rotational basis to make sure that we meet our goals. That concludes Finance Watch. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those now. Sure.
The financial advisor on this $250 million issue. This is different from the financial advisor we selected after going through an RFP, right?
No, this is the financial advisor that was selected and recommended to the board at the conclusion of that RFP.
Okay, so that's not. Well, I understand we only have one financial advisor.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Public financial management.
This isn't a group. This is we have selected one financial advisor.
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. And we one financial advisor for our traditional bond work, and we do have what we call a swap advisor for any of our derivatives work, or work on our derivatives portfolio and the fuel hedges and so forth.
And if we RFP'd that?
That was RFP'd at the same time as we did our it was a financial advisor, swap advisor RFP, and both firms were brought to the Finance Committee and the board at that time and recommended. And Mohenti Gargiulo is that swap advisor, and they are a woman-owned firm.
I didn't remember that.
So I'd be happy to,
refresh my recollection.
bring
Thank
those.
you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
I had difficulty remembering that second part of it.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. We good? Okay, we're moving on to MTA headquarter and all agency items, action items. The first one being a RIF loan that Pat McCoy is going to explain.
I am looking at the committee materials beginning on page 30 this morning. And let me just pull up my file here. Excuse me. No, I'm waiting for my script. Sorry. I don't know what's going on here. So the matter before our Finance Committee today is to approve the financing agreement and supplemental bond resolution under the Transportation Revenue Bond Credit to the Federal Railroad Administration in connection with the Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Financing Loan for positive train control for Long Island Railroad and Metro North Railroad. Board approval is an important step but the final closing has not yet occurred. Closing is tentatively scheduled for early May, and all parties are working to achieve this goal. Between MTA and FRA, as well as the Transportation Revenue Bond Resolution, everything is described in your staff summary. So let me just go through that a little bit. The financing agreement itself was heavily negotiated between MTA and FRA, with the final document containing unique provisions that the MTA has never previously granted to a lender, but these provisions are significantly reduced from FRA's initial positions. Further, the provisions granted to FRA in this agreement include adequate cure periods as well as a right by MTA to exit the loan at any time by repaying any outstanding principal and accrued interest without penalty. I want to thank the many people who have been involved in this project, and the FRA in particular, as a thorough and diligent partner in getting to this point. So some of the key loan provisions are as follows. It's a $967.1 million loan with a final term of November 15th, 2037. That's about a 22.5-year loan. The rate is 2.38%, reflecting U.S. Treasury rates on April 16th, 2015. The security securing MTA's obligation is an MTA Transportation Revenue Bond. Just to refresh your memory, that's rated AA- by Standard & Poor's, A2 by Moody's, and A by Fitch. Again, prepayment is allowed at any time without cost. FRA may assign its rights as a bondholder to an additional holder. However, and I'm going to get to this, the following provisions are available only to the FRA and not to any additional holder should they choose at some point to assign their rights. A conversion right. If in the future MTA issues a structurally senior bond, for example, a PMT bond, the issuance of that debt would give right to the FRA to exchange their TRB bond for that structurally senior bond. That's a 90-day right that they have. That's a very good provision that they have. Advanced suspension event. The occurrence of any resolution default, a material adverse effect, which embodies any major change in MTA's operations or financial condition, misrepresentation, insolvency, or action by New York State that would violate its pledge and agreement to not limit or alter the denial of bankruptcy by the MTA or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. MTA cannot declare bankruptcy. If that were to somehow be changed at the state level, that would be an impairment. There is a rating requirement, which is that MTA must maintain at least 2 ratings at the low A level, either A- or A3. Failure to maintain such ratings for a period of 180 days results in a ratings downgrade event, and that would cause the cost of the loan to increase by an additional 2%. We believe that 180-day cure period would give us adequate time to deal with whatever issues cause that rating change. Sure.
Is that provision 180 continuous days or a total of 180 days?
180 continuous days.
Continuous.
If at some point it were to change, that stops the clock and it would start again.
We just said, what happens
The downgrade rate would cause the base rate of 2.38% to increase by an additional 2%, so it would go to 4.38% at that point. So that would be our cost of funds if our credit deteriorated until we cured it.
Unless you, right.
Until it were to be cured.
Excuse me?
Sure.
In the past 10 years, has our rating ever dropped below that?
We have had rating changes up and down over the past 10 years. We've consistently been in the A category on the transportation revenue credit, and I can pull up a ratings history that would be happy to send that to the entire committee, because it does show our ratings over time.
That'd be good to see.
But since the debt restructuring in 2002, we've been consistently in the A category.
Okay.
So to answer your question, in the last 10 years, we've not hit those levels.
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
And we don't expect to in the next
No, we do not.
25 or 30 years.
All of our ratings are currently stable, meaning that we would expect them to stay where they are.
Are these provisions the ones that, particularly the negative covenant of indebtedness that you're referring, that we were discussing, are they typical in other similar type of loans?
Certainly whenever we negotiate with a bank on a letter of credit supporting variable rate debt, things like rating standards are absolutely part of those documents. Concepts like material adverse effect are often negotiated heavily in terms of what is material and what is not. But each,
But with RIF, I'm sorry. I didn't-
but well, this is our first and only loan with RIF. In terms of their other agreements, we believe that we've negotiated a very favorable agreement for the MTA that, from what we understand, and again, we don't have full transparency to other deals, but those that we've had some insight into, we believe that this transaction represents a very favorable position for MTA.
Do we have any other pending application in front of them or have we withdrawn the other?
We have not withdrawn the balance of the application. Just as a refresh, the MTA initially applied for a RIF loan in April of 2011. That was a $3 billion request to help pay for the local share of East Side Access. We amended that application in January of 2014, and this is all described in the staff summary. That application was amended to reduce the East Side Access request to $2 billion and to put positive train control in there for $967 million. It is our understanding that the balance of the request for East Side Access is not being considered further at this point by FRA.
Wasn't there,
Sorry.
Can you, Pat, just, I actually do have some knowledge of what the terms are of loans, having been part of that program when I was at USDOT. Can you walk us through why we're doing this? Just, you sort of jumped into the details, but can you take a step back?
Sure. The RIF loan itself was established, I believe it was in 2009.
No, why we,
Why
the
did we go-
MTA, are borrowing $1 billion to do positive train control.
Okay. Well, we're borrowing $1 billion to invest in positive train control because it's a congressionally required technology that needs to be put on any railroad where there's passengers being transported. It comes out, so the requirement is there, and we're obliged to install the technology. It is an unfunded mandate in the sense that there are no specific funds earmarked by Congress to invest in this technology. The RIF program, in many ways, is suited for this program because it addresses the needs of both freight and commuter railroads throughout the country. We operate, obviously, the largest 2 commuter railroads in the country and have a pressing need for low-cost financing, particularly for mandated technology improvements.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the RIF program wasn't actually envisioned to do this. It was envisioned to make loans to railroads that would then use that to turn a profit that would then be used to pay the loan back. So this is not, I think, I guess I'll just confess some anxiety here, understanding I know well the history of positive train control and how it turned into an unfunded mandate. But just to be clear, we're borrowing a lot of money now that will be paid back over a couple of generations for something that's not a revenue-generating activity. It's just adding to the MTA's debt load pretty significantly.
this was going to be funded by debt, whether it was our transportation revenue bonds or whether it was a more favorable borrowing facility provided by the federal government. It was part of the capital plan for the 10 to 14 program. It's a part of the capital plan for the 15 to 19. So we were going to be using our resources wherever they came from to fund this as part of the overall plan. The attractive element is the interest rate and the fact that effectively we don't start principal right away. So the interest rate on this, as Pat said, is 2.38%. That interest rate is probably 85 to 90 basis points less than what we could borrow today in the tax-exempt market. It is significantly less than the rate that we built into our financial plan for borrowing this through the transportation revenue bonds. And if you recall, in the 15 to 19 capital plan that we have proposed in terms of all of our funding sources, there's $200 million in there that we proposed that would be additional funds, present value, if you will, that would be generated if we could get this RIF loan for PTC. Our preliminary numbers looking at this suggest that at a 2.38% borrowing rate versus what we have built into the plan right now to borrow, we're going to more than exceed the $200 million. So it's a favorable plan it's a favorable program for us. It helps us to fund something that we were committed to do. And so, in a sense, the rest of our plan is fungible, so if we use equity or if we use pay-as-you-go or we use something over here to fund other projects, we're still using this as part of an overall plan. The life of the loan really is, it's what we negotiated with FRA in terms of giving the shorter life of PTC assets. So we feel like it's a favorable structure for us, definitely a favorable rate, and it helps us to achieve some of the savings that we hope to bank for the 15 to 19 program.
Do you know when do we have to start paying back the loan?
We start paying this back in 18.
Yeah, okay. I mean, just again, one of the being familiar with the federal loan programs, part of the feature that makes them attractive is the ability to delay starting to pay the loans back, but that wasn't actually envisioned. It was envisioned for private entities that would be making some sort of investment, and then that investment would become revenue generating. Then they would start to pay the loan back. It wasn't actually envisioned in this scenario, which is, I understand, it helps us in the short term, but it just...
Well, I would say this helps us in the long term, because we would probably be borrowing this, again, with an average life of about 20 years. Anyway, we would be selling transportation at a much higher rate. So I would also just say many of the investments we make are not revenue-generating investments here. They're things that we just have to do to maintain, a state of, as you know, Polly. So I think we would love to continue to view this RIF program, since there's significant dollars yet to be loaned, as something that might be available for us to apply to for some of our other commuter railroad projects. And if we conclude this transaction and if we start drawing the funds down, we would certainly like at some point to enter into a dialogue with FRA on to see how this program might be useful for some of our expansion projects or other things, perhaps such as, PIN access.
You have to, what you have to really look at this, it's part of our capital plan because we have to do it anyway, and we'd have to spend the money, so it's really an inexpensive, a relatively inexpensive way to finance our capital plan.
Yeah, I just
That's the
want to
bottom
make
line.
people, I just want to make sure people are understanding this isn't the federal government giving us $1 billion. We got to pay it back. Yeah, it's not a grant. And, hopefully the interest rate, it's
Slow.
well, I know, you read the news and you'd think though like the feds were handing us $1 billion.
Well,
They're not.
yes, in the press, they did say that this would reduce our $15 billion gap.
Correct.
$5 billion. It's not affecting it. We were going to have.
Correct. It does
so
not reduce our
It's
capital.
not, it is cheap money, which is always good, but it's not free.
Let me ask a question on that, what you just said, because we had originally anticipated borrowing, for lack of a better term, $3 billion from them for East Side Access. That was the original app. So I assumed we put that into the plan in some fashion.
Well, what we did is we put it in as an expectation that we would borrow. And if you recall, it was like 2.2 for new money.
Right.
And we were going to refinance 800 million of our other obligations, all related to East Side Access. We never built the economics of the RIF loan into our cash flows. Why? Because it was an unapproved, we still
Right.
had to apply. So we protected our financial projections by still assuming that we were going to sell transportation revenue bonds at the rates that we had built. So we knew that if we were able to receive the RIF loan, if it was approved, it would only make things more attractive, reduce our cost. So again, we never built the economics into the 10 to 14 plan, and we hoped with the smaller request for PTC instead of the $3 billion that we would be able to achieve present value savings. And now, again, assuming closing, I think we're going to hit the target.
Because we are still going to have to finance the other $2.2 billion for East Side Access.
Yes.
That doesn't go away. It just, because we're not getting it this way, and PTC is getting it this way, East Side Access is now getting their money the other way, which was the transportation revenue bonds.
Yes, and those debt issuances and the cash flows that their support have been built into our financial
Right,
plan.
okay.
So again, we've been very conservative in not anticipating something that we didn't have control over.
Okay.
Yeah, Bob, one quick thing, just so I understand it. Oh, go ahead.
Didn't we have seek federal loans for Sandy mitigation? And what happened with that?
The funds that were, the federal funds that were sought after Sandy, those were grants to pay for the damage and as well as the mitigation work that came after.
So the only loans that we sought were for East Side access and not for any of the capital work that needed to be done?
The only
after Sandy?
loans we have sought are what I'm describing here, yes. Nothing, no loans have been sought for Sandy work.
Okay.
Federal, yeah.
I got it.
I just wanted to note that Senator Schumer co-sponsored a bill with Senator Gillibrand to provide funding for the PTC changes. That bill was introduced on the 13th of April.
The attractive thing is that we draw the funds down only as we need to spend the money. So if there were to be a grant that's made available, we can stop this loan at any time and take any grants that might be available. So that's what's nice about this. We're not just selling bonds and then we're stuck with it. We'll draw the money down as we need it, and if free money came along, we would be in line.
My understanding, you also have the right to prepay this without penalty.
That is correct.
At any time.
That is correct.
So you have complete flexibility in the thing.
Okay.
Is that it then? Okay, a motion, please? A second, please? We have a second. All in favor? Any opposed? So moved. Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, next we have, it's an agreement with Operation Lifesaver. We're seeking board approval between MTA and Operation Lifesaver Incorporated, OLI, pursuant to which OLI will provide assistance to MTA to ensure that the public awareness, outreach, and education program components of MTA headquarters' enhanced grade crossing safety initiative are responsive to the unique circumstances found within the MTA system. That's a $35,000 contract, and we need board approval.
We have a motion. A second, please. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes.
Okay, the next item is the MTA 2014 Annual Investment Report. The staff summary is on page 130. The investment report itself is a bound. We are asking the board to reapprove the board-adopted investment guidelines and to approve the MTA submission of the 2014 Annual Investment Report.
Now, do we need a motion for this?
We need a motion, yeah.
Okay, a motion, please. So moved. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. What are the high points of this investment?
Vinay, would you want to discuss it? Vinay Dayal, our treasurer, is here.
High points of the...
The highlights.
Any highlights, anything noteworthy?
On the second page is the performance report. We earned $5.6 million on a portfolio of about $4.5 billion, which is about 12 basis points. And it compares favorably to average T-bill rates, 0.06% on 6-month and 0.11% on annual. That's it.
May we have a motion, please? Second? All in favor? Any opposed? So moved. Doug?
Okay, we're moving to report and information items. The first item is the annual report of variable rate debt, which Pat McCoy is going to take us through.
Okay. Thank you. So the variable rate report is in your, on director's desk. It's in the exhibit book for the meeting today, and I think we're going to pull it up on screen. Okay, thanks. The board has adopted a variable rate policy concerning the use and issuance of variable rate debt. We may issue variable rate debt in such amounts as deemed necessary or beneficial by staff to provide funding for approved capital programs or to refund existing obligations of the authority. Principal amount of variable rate debt outstanding shall not exceed 25% of aggregate principal amount of all outstanding obligations of the authority. This is just a highlight of the policy. The full policy is in your board materials, but we're happy to get into more detail if you want. The portfolio of variable rate debt, as you can see, what we're talking about is the green slice of the pie here, $2.68 billion in such debt. The bulk of our debt in the blue slice of the pie, 84% or just under $30 billion, is in fixed rate mode. And then the orange slice addresses synthetic fixed rate debt. We report on that in the work plan, just so you know, in October of each year on the work plan. So we're just at 8%. Our variable rate debt takes on different characters in the market. As you can see here, the large portion in green is issued as floating rate notes. That's $2.4 billion or 47%. We also have daily variable rate demand bonds of $813 million and weekly variable rate demand bonds of just over $1 billion. The variable rate demand bonds are issued through the credit and liquidity support of large commercial banks, and we have some detail on that further in the presentation. We have a small piece of auction rate securities still outstanding, $276 million. And lastly, we occasionally issue bond anticipation notes. We currently have $550 million out, and that's what we use as our in the commercial paper mode for capital programs. Again, this just gives you some more color on what I just described in terms of the types of products that are in the portfolio in the variable rate mode. And as you can see, looking at our variable rate portfolio over time, going back to 2008, we've stayed fairly consistent in that roughly $2.7 billion range, with a notable sort of decline back in 2011 down to $2.25 billion. But you know, the variable rate debt has been performing very well, as you'll see here in a minute. It represents being able to utilize the shortest part of the yield curve for long-term capital investments, and it continues to be an important piece of the portfolio. And just to give you some additional historical perspective, here you see on the left the 30-year tax-exempt bond rate, with that average of just under 4% over the time period we're showing here, 2010 to 2015. And then the SIFMA rate. SIFMA is the Securities and Industry Financial Markets Association, and they publish an index that we utilize to measure how our variable rate debt is performing. And as you can see here, the SIFMA rate over that same time period is just a little over 1%, about 1.5% there. And as you can see, the blue line, and most recently, really since 2013, early 2013, we've been well inside of that average. And here you see our variable rate debt performance in calendar year 2014. We have a weighted daily average, and you can see the variable rate bonds average rate is 0.82% over the period. So, and a couple benchmarks are included here just for your reference: the RBI, which is the Revenue Bond Index, the MMD, which is the proxy for the fixed rate market. So you can see, if you were to want to say what would it be in a fixed rate mode, those would give you some index proxies. The 30-year Treasury at 3.34%, and 1 at 0.11%, SIFMA at 0.15%. Here you see liquidity expirations in FRN and term bond reset dates by year, 2015 to 2018. This, in a sense, gives you a sense of what our work plan is going forward. Expiring liquidity facilities are a common part of our office, needing to go out and work with the commercial banks in securing the lowest cost liquidity facilities. The FRNs have to periodically be remarketed, and you see those in the red, and then the green is the bands, and as you can see here, we have a band coming up, the TBTA band, which I talked about earlier, that needs to be taken out. I'm not going to go through the appendix, but in the appendix you have the 2015 liquidity expiration FRN and term bond reset dates, all of our remarketing agents that we utilize, and we try to use a broad variety of remarketing agents. and then as well as a list of our credit and liquidity support providers that we work with. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any at this point.
Are there any questions? Okay, thank you very much,
Thank
Pat.
you. Okay.
Doug, next item.
Yeah, continuing with the report and information items, I believe you all received a draft of the MTA's financial statements for the 12 months ended December 2014. That was a separate document, like I said, and it will be presented to the Audit Committee at the Wednesday meeting, so that's just for your information. Going beyond that, we have we have headquarter procurements. We have 4 competitive procurements. Before I asked you for your approval on that, we have Vincent Gill and Marina Myers from Metro North who are going to talk about a pretty innovative technique that they're using to acquire energy on the New Haven line for Metro North. Come on up.
Good afternoon. The Metro North Energy Group, under the direction of John Kesich and Jack Raguzio, has been working with the MTA Business Service Center on a power purchase for Traction Power New Haven line. We have 3 qualified pre-bidders for a competitive bid process. Based on their bids, we will go 1 year out, and then at the end of 1 year, have the 3 bidders respond again to the bid process. By doing the RFP, Metro North is requesting different pricing methodologies in order to reduce costs and hopefully get us down to the market prices. I'd like to thank Rena Elliott, Angel Barbosa from BSC, Monica Murray and Shana Gooden from MTA headquarters, and also like to thank Paul Asiri sitting behind me, and then the people from Port Authority, Christine Wydick and Chris Seppi, and Office of General Services, Steve Starwitz and John Hoff. Any questions?
My understanding is that in New York State, because this applies to Connecticut.
Correct.
Okay. In New York State, MTA has separate contracts with the utility companies.
In New York State, with Metro North, we have, MTA headquarters has an agreement with the New York Power Authority.
Right.
Which serves our Harlem and Hudson lines.
Right.
But we also have services up at Central Hudson and Orange and Rockland, which we purchase through Office of General Services.
Right, so we have contracts.
We have contracts.
With utility companies.
The only one we really have a utility contract in New York State is New York State Electric and Gas.
Okay, and on Long Island, the Long Island Railroad has a contract with Long Island Power Authority.
That is my understanding,
Okay.
correct.
So my question to you is, one would assume, based upon the reading, that you are trying to find prices less than those prices.
Correct. What happens in Connecticut
I assume
is...
that was the point of all of this.
Yes, in Connecticut, the utility prices, they call the provider of last resort.
Right.
What's been going on in the winter months, the prices have been skyrocketing to 25, 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And we've been going in the past out 6 months with an RFQ, but we've been running into either the winter peak or the summer peak. And by going out 1 year, we feel that we will receive levelized pricing from the various bidders.
Okay. With the chairman's consent, I would ask if, after you have gone through this, for whatever period of time you're going to go through this, you're obviously going to compare the prices you're going to get to the prices you otherwise would have gotten in Connecticut, I assume.
Correct.
Okay. Could the chairman request that they also compare those prices that they get to the other prices MTA pays in the other parts of the region, so we can see whether this is an opportunity that might be also appropriate on Long Island and in New York City and in Westchester?
Well,
They
I
can
think
make the same
Mitch, it's
comparison?
a great point, and actually, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, if this test works out, do you and your organization, do they have plans, Metro North Long Island Railroad, to go forward and do the same thing in New York State for Metro North and Long Island? What have you talked about doing? That's the real question, going forward.
Going forward, my understanding is the agreement with New York Power Authority expires in 2017, and that is going through. That's being administered by headquarters, but we are looking out past 2017 for our other utilities in Connecticut, Orange and Rockland, NYSEG.
Okay. And what happens with the TA? What happens with the transit authorities? That's the same thing, New York Power Authority?
Correct.
So, and how do you know how long their contract goes for?
The NYPA agreement with headquarters expires December 31st, 2017, and that covers all of the New York City Transit Authority,
The whole thing?
the whole load, and it covers Long Island Railroad operations in New York City and Con Ed service territory, and the same for Metro North.
Okay. I think that Mitch has brought up a really very important point, because this is a very small part of our power needs. What, it must be just a few percentage points compared to the total power need between the transit authority and the two commuter railroads. I think what we should do, and I know this is a test, I guess, right, and we want to see how this whole thing works, but I think this is something that we really need. 2017 is not that far away. It's a year and a half away. And I think this is something this committee really needs to look at now, because you brought up, and I know that Angel's whole, consolidation of procurements, this is one of the major things we're looking at. But I don't know, Bob, how we can help as the Finance Committee. I think we should have reports. I think this is a major item here, and I think that Mitch brings up a really good point, and we started to talk about it this morning with Angel. But maybe you could fill us in where we stand with this whole deal.
Well, energy is a major initiative for us. There's a lot of people involved in energy management around the company. There's a question on whether we have adequate information for some managers to be able to make the right decisions in terms of how much they use. There's an management procurement that we have looking at. So this is one piece of a much bigger picture, but really right now, Vince and his team are kind of taking the lead on this one thing to see whether being a little bit more aggressive, being more flexible in the market, we can pick up better pricing than we otherwise would get through the tariff that we'd otherwise pay. So yes, definitely we will be looking at this and at other opportunities as we go forward. We're very much aware, just as the City of New York and others who participate in this New York State Power Authority and a governmental group, that 2017 is a time, and we want to make sure that if we re-up with them, we're re-upping in ways that serve our needs, as opposed to just accepting something.
The whole thing's going to be bid out. The
well,
way I understand it, though, Bob, to answer Mitch's question, is that with the consolidation and the business services of purchasing, this is one of the key things, along with data processing, information services, that they're looking at, because there's huge money here, as you point out. And I think that this is just the first step here, but I think there's a really good point, Bob. We don't have that long to go, because 2017 is going to be here in a minute. And it's really important that we start working on this right away.
We are, okay? But again, just so you know that we recognize there's a lot of dollars here. We're trying to focus on where the spend is. That's where the savings are. And if we can change, again, our processes or procedures, and maybe it's incremental, but to change them incrementally to make sure that we're not putting the company at risk or any agency at risk, that's the goal. But definitely, we're looking at this.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
This is underway, I assure you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have four, including that procurement, we have 4 competitive procurements for MTA headquarters for a grand total of $9,252,000.
A motion, please. A second, please. Hold it. Chuck,
Chairman, I ask to be recused from item number 1.
did you get that?
The
Okay.
fuel oil item.
So we have a motion, a second. All in favor, please? Any opposed? Then the procurements are moved.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Doug.
Moving to Long Island Railroad Metro North Committee items. For Metro North, there's one competitive procurement for Metro North for an RFP and in the not-to-exceed amount of $195 million.
Okay, a motion's made, a second, please. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are two procurements for Long Island Railroad, the first one being a non-competitive procurement jointly with Metro-North for $127,000. The second being a competitive procurement request to use the RFP process for new signal equipment.
Motion, please. Second, please. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. We have two competitive procurements for New York City Transit and MTA bus operations for a grand total of $134 million.
Motion, please. Second, please. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Bridges and tunnels, we have an action item, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge rebate programs. We're asking the board to adopt a resolution revisiting the two MTA toll rebate programs at the Verrazano Narrow Bridge, which were initially approved by the board on February 24th, 2014, and implemented by TBTA with an effective date of April 1st, 2014.
Alan, I figured you'd be in favor of it. Just something, Bertie told me so. Second, please. All in favor?
I have a question.
Wait, stop. Jonathan?
So what's the term of this that we're being asked to approve for this count?
It would be similar to what was last year, where the state and the MTA are equally contributing $7 million, but in addition, the state is upping its contribution by $3.3 million to retain the $5.50 fare for Staten Island residents.
Right,
We're out of pocket $7 million.
We're the same, they're making up for the current increase
That's
in the
correct.
toll, but the term is 1 year?
That's for 1 year, that's right.
Well, the program would continue as long as the funding's there. Okay, so if there's funding that's provided next year, we would continue at that level. If there's no funding, the program's over. So it's to continue last year's program into this year because funding is available. To the extent the funding's not there, the rebates end.
Okay. So it's the lesser of the existence of funding and some date,
So,
which is which date? I'm just trying to come up
yeah,
with a
the
term
funding,
of this.
it's on a state fiscal year is how the state.
So it's
so-
March 31st,
right.
16.
No, it's April 1st to March 31st is how the state would fund it. We look at it from our calendar year, but it's still got to be no more money than what we are being matched. So,
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
So we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor? You have a question?
Anyway, if as long as the money's provided, this is just going to continue, it needs no further board approval. Is that correct? Like next year, as long as the money's provided, there won't be any, isn't that what it said in the staff summary?
It's an evergreen program as long as three things happen. One condition is MTA will never commit more than $7 million annually. Two is that the state contributes at least half the cost. And the third is that the MTA funding will be included in the MTA budget for the particular year. So the board, when adopting the budget, will be adopting an ongoing year's funding.
No separate staff summary for this, okay.
Yes, no. No, it is just the budget approval. Correct. Because one didn't have, it completely spelled out in the resolution that we did last year that it would be evergreen, and we made it very clear in this year's. So we wanted to do that. And also, there was the nuance of the state adding additional money, so it wasn't just 50-50. They've added additional money this year to keep the resident toll increase rate.
Told maybe ask my fellow board members to recall, or you guys can advise, weren't we told that you would come back to us each year? The notion of evergreen strikes me as being new.
I think there was a discussion last year, we can look in a minute, but that it would be evergreen. But it was not, that was raised orally, and we wanted to make it very clear in the written resolution.
So when will you come back to us?
We
on
would
this
only
issue?
come back with the MTA budget approval for the funding for the following year unless there were some change from the structure that's been approved.
So it's going to be hidden, not to use it in a pejorative sense. It's going to be contained within our annual budget, correct? All right, well, I
Here-
just point
let
out
me
this
tell you what I
$3 million issue is going to
Yeah.
get a little bit lost
Right.
in our annual budget of how many
Well,
billion?
I would say that there are certain things that we are very much aware of dollars that we expect to get from the state government, and we watch those things very carefully, and we make sure we're supposed to get that dollar. But what you would see is it would be included in the budget that you would adopt in December of every year. We would see what happens in the state budget, which is then done before March 31st, hopefully. You'd have to have it in the budget that you approved, and we'll definitely make sure we have that in the staff summary every year for you to see. Then it would be subject to the state passing it, and again, at a
Staff
level.
summary, Bob, I'm
That
sorry.
in December, when we do the budget, we do a staff summary it's probably a very detailed, the most detailed staff summary we do. And we lay out all the distributions of monies and the allocation of certain tax subsidies and things like
They're
that.
doing, the state's doing a special appropriation for this, correct?
It would be in the state budget. So whether you want to call it a special appropriation, it's a line item in the state budget.
It's a line item in the state budget, that's what. I think, is there a way you can notify us if that is not contained? I mean, the whole deal was, which I want to support, is that we were going to do what we were going to do, they were going to do what they were going to do, but we weren't going to do it without their doing it. And you were going to come back to us to get approval to extend it, which you are doing now.
Yeah.
That's what he just said.
He's saying two different things, Mr. Chairman. He's also saying it's going to be a line item in a budget that's hundreds of pages long.
But we
So
see that, but we,
you're not going to see it,
Yes,
nor
we
will
will.
any of us. $3 million.
No, we see it. There is a section dedicated for transportation, and there's different things that affect different agencies. We'll see, I guarantee you, we will make sure we see a line item that says it there, because we have no obligation, and you have certainly, by your actions previously and hopefully today, and Wednesday, I should say, are not authorizing us to spend any dollar more than what the state is going to match, up to a cap of 7. So we view that to be very, very important, and we will make sure that, one, you see it in our staff summary in December, and that we see it in the state's approved and adopted budget that will happen in the springtime. And again, so unless you approve it, and unless the dollars that are in the state budget are there, not going to happen. And we're also going to make sure we get the money, okay, or we have a mechanism to recover it.
Okay, that, you're describing what I thought the deal was, and that's what I intended to support after the eloquent presentation or two right behind me. Okay, thank you.
I'm a little concerned about the process, not with the merits, which I think are merited. The process that concerns me is you will have, in a detailed budget, a precise amount for a specific project, namely subsidy here for the rebate. And what you are then saying to each member of the board is, if you next year do not want to do it, or this year do not want to do it, you have a line item veto over that portion of the budget. It seems to me that if you do that, two events occur. One, you encourage line item action by this board on every item in the budget, on that theory. And number two, you create the position where people may not have notice and knowledge of what they are doing and be able to do it. That is why I think the point that John makes, Commissioner Ballin makes, is that this is something that ought to be done on a focused basis rather than a buried basis, if you will.
I hear you, Commissioner Murler. I don't plan on burying this. This is something that if you want to know the truth, I'm glad I'm not the one making the decision because I'm not sure it would be that decision. But this is something that was brought to the board, and the board approved it last year. We're putting it out as the way that the legislature has, requested, the executive has requested, and the board to consider, because it's the board decision. I'm just saying, I will make sure that this is not a buried item. That's my only point.
Bob, you misunderstand me. I do support it. But my point is, circumstances change, and there may be a different reason. There may be a reason to give it an even greater credit. In addition, you're encouraging me and other members of the board to start a line-by-line commentary on your budget. I don't think you want that.
Jeff, go ahead.
This happened last year, right? How much do we get each year from the state of New York in operating dollars? Roughly?
About $4.3 billion in operating dollars.
Different
operating
sources,
dollars.
Yeah.
Some direct, some not so direct.
Have they reduced the operating dollars in the last 2-3 years, each year?
No,
They've been on the increase.
Right.
Yeah.
If they turn around and reduce their operating dollars by $7 million, yet still pass this, what happens?
Well, if they were to do that, we would reflect that. We would know that in the spring, and we would reflect that within our July financial plan forecast. We would redo our state subsidy forecasts.
I think the way I would look at it is we receive direct subsidies, or we receive the indirect subsidies, as specific categories and specific lines. It's the MMTOA monies that come through, it's the PBT, it's the PMT. This is a line where they are saying, directed from the general fund, they will do it.
Have there been instances where the state, in its wisdom, redirected funds that are supposed to go to the MTA for other purposes?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I'm merely pointing out that this is a priority of the state that they're once again forcing onto the MTA. Again, substantively, I'm actually also not opposed to this. But we just need to be careful and realize that everything we do is a function of pressure from our funding partners. And as we listen to our funding partners and do what they would like us to do, I would like our funding partners to continue to listen to us. Not necessarily in this item, but plenty of other items I can go on for a while, which I hope we get to before the end of this meeting. And I think we need to remember that this relationship goes both ways. I fully support what we're trying to do on a substantive level. But Bob, as you know, and I think you tell us and remind us, we need to do this with our funding partners, and that's fine. But there's a priority they're making, but our hands become tied. And I hope that they listen to us on our priorities when we need them as well.
Okay, may we have a motion, please? A second, please. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Doug, go ahead.
Okay, lastly, we have no items for FIMTech, and we would turn the meeting over to Jeff in the real estate section.
No, wait a second. There's something, the most important thing that affects the MTA hasn't even been discussed, or it's been discussed like circumspect. Yeah. We have our capital plan, which is up there in Albany, and it's $15 billion short now. And I wondered, Bob, if you could just give the Finance Committee a little update where we stand since our last discussion of this and what's happening, if you could. I don't know. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. So I would ask Bob to just give us a little update as to what's happening currently with the capital plan and where we stand, because as you know, we have approximately $15 billion shortage of what we feel we need to keep the system up to good repair. So Bob, could you just bring us up to date, please?
So the $32 billion capital program that the board approved had the two pieces. It had roughly $3 billion for bridges and tunnels, which is self-funded, and it has $29 billion that we have that's sent to the Capital Program Review Board. As you know, the Capital Program Review Board turned it down without prejudice, basically sent it back to us. We have continued to have discussions with various legislative committees, staffers from the various committees, individual conversations with members of the legislature and their staff, and conversations with the executive branch. The number that we still are putting out there is the 32 or roughly 29 billion for our Capital Program Review Board. We're still hopeful that during the balance of the session, or during the session, that it's going to address our needs, at least our needs, if not for a full 5 years, but address our needs for a sufficient amount of time that we can keep our program going. That may happen, that may not happen. What we really want is a 5-year capital program. I think we all know that just let's address what we all recognize to be significant. I have to say, if there is no resolution, if we do not receive adequate funding to carry us through, at least as we did last time for 2 years, we don't have sufficient funds to keep the program going. And at that point, the board would have to make a decision on whether the board wants to look to or turn to self-help. And self-help really is only one thing, and that has to do with fares and tolls. We understand what the board thinks about, minimizing the pressure that fares and tolls applies. Had to close a gap. I think we've said this publicly, or it's out there publicly, that if it was a $15 billion gap and we were to have to close that gap through the issuance of additional debt supported by fares and tolls, we'd be talking about something that would be an incremental 15% in fares and tolls. So again, I'm not saying and suggesting that that's coming from staff. I'm not suggesting to anyone that the board has discussed that. But I do have to say that to the extent that we're not able to fund a capital program of the appropriate size that we feel meets the state of good repair and the ongoing needs of this community that we serve, that at some point, board may take action, and the action that they really only can turn to would be one that addresses fair.
One thing, and then maybe somebody else wants to say something, we welcome that. The thing that really concerns me the most is what you said, Bob. That's the state of good repair. Because if we don't get this funding, I mean, we all know what the situation is with the system now, and forgetting about new capital projects, big capital projects, we need to keep the system up to date and to keep it running well and keep everything maintained properly. And to me, that's the real concern here. We have these ongoing large capital projects which have to be completed for obvious reasons. And we can't forget about the rest of the system. So that's the concern, what you said, the state of good repair.
That because, as you've heard from various, well, I don't know if you were here, but various committees have reported record ever-increasing ridership in a lot of areas, and your ability to service that ridership depends on, getting CBTC on more lines on the subways, new equipment, and all of this other technology. So the comfort and the viability of the system is also, and the possible expansion is also at stake.
So I'm glad we brought this topic up. It's obviously something I was referring to before about our funding partners. I've talked about the capital plan process for many years, right? So we've put together a plan several months ago. It was presented to the CPRB. I believe it was validated by a commission of experts, the Transportation Reinvention Commission. Maybe not in whole, but for the most part. I think the size of our capital plan was validated by every other third-party organization out there. I think our capital plan is pretty obvious we have a need. And I'm very curious, and frankly, pointing to something you talked about, which is you're hopeful Albany's going to act in the next 2 months. I'm probably not as hopeful as you, because it's a very difficult situation in Albany right now. And the governor has said it himself. that certain things can't be dealt with because of other issues. And I, for one, really would like to know, and I know you alluded to it, I think you said 15% fare increases, just sort of maybe for the next meeting or in the future, what the process is for that. Because otherwise, we're really not going to have a choice. If they don't do anything in the next 2 months, forget the pun. We have a freight train coming at us, right? We've got capital projects that won't be able to be built, that doesn't serve the increased ridership, that's construction jobs on the line that will be cut because we'll have no choice to do it. We're going to have no choice but to either make massive, massive cuts to a transportation system that no one on this board has ever agreed to do, or B, we're going to have to increase fares by that 15% to pay for it. You know, we talked about the beginning of this meeting about how we finance this capital plan. We spent a lot of time discussing $1 billion, the RIF loan, and Polly pointed out it's a loan. Guys, everything we're talking about is a loan without new revenue. This is $15 billion. And we have to listen to our funding partners. That's the federal government, the state government, the city government, who all have their own ideas to add to that capital plan, which is not in our capital plan right now. So there's been a lot of conversations about, well, we have this funding plan we're thinking about, we're looking at it, but no one's really come out there and said, you guys really do have a $32 billion capital plan, and we're committed to getting it solved in the next 2 months. And that really concerns me.
Jeff, it's even worse than that. You can't even borrow the money if you don't have the
Yeah, we have no new revenue.
if you don't have the revenue to finance, to pay for the debt service.
So I'm increasingly concerned that this is a real situation this board has to face. We can only do so much. We can send the plan. We can tell people we want the plan. I don't know what else to do or what we can do so that they actually hear us and let them know that this is a real problem that's not going to impact just the MTA. It's going to impact the riders. It's going to impact the labor force. It's going to impact the construction unions. It's going to impact jobs. And every person that we have to bring into the city every single day and the region is going to be impacted by this. So I'm getting a little anxious now. I should calm down. But this is a real serious issue. I don't know what we can do in order to let our partners know that this is real.
The first thing we can do is talk about it like we are, because I think this is a very healthy conversation. That's why I brought it up, because I'm very concerned about it. You know, you go through these budget items, it looks like we're swimming in cash. You know, we have $100 million surplus, thank God, but that's also real estate taxes, which can go away, as we all know. For those of us that have been here before, we used to get $1.7 billion in revenue from the real estate tax, and that went to $300 million, and then we had $1 billion hole in our budget because we used that as the ability to operate the system. So we're not in good shape. I mean, we really have to, you're right, Jeff, this is a serious issue that we all have to face, and as fiduciaries, which we all are, to protect the system and to protect the riders, this is a very important thing for us to bring up. Alan?
Well, I mean, I concur with Jeff's comments, and, you know, we have lamented this for years in terms of the process of kicking the can down the road and the need for a structural change in how we get funded, that we knew that this day would come, and this day is here. The state of New York and the city of New York need to do things fundamentally different than they have in the past, and they've got to do it fairly quickly. As fiduciaries here, we only have the options that statutorily given to us, which are to the ability to raise fares and tolls, and or something that I think most of us will oppose to our death, the service cuts. But as transportation advocates, we also have a role that we can play in supporting alternatives. And in that vein, I urge all of you to look at the Move New York plan, which I think doesn't solve all of the problem, but at least it is a viable suggestion that's out there, and it needs to be advanced so that it cures a lot of issues that we, certainly that I have and many of us have talked about, which is tolling inequities. It solves the horizontal problem in terms of we don't have to do the specialized. It'll make it the same for everybody in the outer regions. It'll create more mass transit funding. It will give funding for the city of New York in terms of its roads and bridges, which they desperately need. And I think is a significant public policy plan that is worthy of people's look. I believe the Daily News endorsed it this past weekend. I think the Times may have as well. And, you know, people need to get behind some ideas, whether it be additional taxation, you know, increased commitments of capital funding to actually fill in the ways that we can get there.
Okay, unless anybody else wants to say something, Jeff, you want to say something quick?
response to
Because
that?
I don't want to, the one thing we don't want to do is run too late here, and we do have a big real estate agenda we have to do too.
I appreciate just a quick response, and I just want to make sure as a board, and first of all, I think everyone probably knows my history with some of those ideas that were floated out there. As a board, I think most immediately, the first thing we should do is make sure people realize we have a $32 billion problem. And I would be satisfied if people of all funding partners agree that that's the case, and then we can have a serious conversation. Or our partners need to have a serious, forget us for a minute, right? I mean, we were involved in previous conversations to some extent, but at the end of the day, when Albany says this is how you're going to fund the last capital plan, that's what it is. We don't have a seat at the table. And I think that's the frustration, is we have no choice but to then act one thing only, which is by increasing the fares. So look, I'm a big supporter of alternative proposals, but as a board, I want to make sure that our partners recognize we have a serious problem and they're committed to working to find a solution. I haven't felt that. Maybe it's the media, and I'm not second guessing what people feel, but there's a real $32 billion problem. I would like to see our partners all say they have.
Okay, I'm sure we're going to hear more about it. I think it's a really useful conversation, obviously, we need to be involved with. So we don't run late. Jeff, would you please bring us up? Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. Take over the real estate part.
Good afternoon. We do have 7 action items today, each the subject of a separate staff summary. Unless there are any questions about the 6 that are in the nature of transactions, I'd like to call on General Counsel Jerry Page to speak to some background and explanation with respect to the proposed changes to the advertising standards. Do I have any questions about any of the 6 transactions?
The last one, I think, is mentioned as an information item. It regards what we acted on last month.
Right.
But it's specific to the tiebacks or some arrangement with the developer there. Does that mean if that's done, he can develop to the full height?
Yes. When I brought you that project last month, there had been some last-minute concern about a physical condition that had been discovered there in the late going. Frankly, that condition exists without regard to the size of the building. We're very pleased that we've reached a financial accommodation there that will leave our $56 million payday intact.
And also to note that they're going to pay for the work,
yes,
even though the easement has expired.
That's correct.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you.
Barry, that was the penultimate item. What is the final information item on the PILOST? You're not asking for our vote on that, correct?
Give me another one. It's a little bit of a technical explanation, but as noted in the staff summary, we have previously received from the board direction to implement various arrangements there, including provisions of the lease that call for the payment in lieu of sales tax. Those payments in lieu of sales tax arise because the developer does not, in fact, have an obligation to pay sales tax on materials that are incorporated into structures owned by the MTA, as all the buildings there are. So the question that has arisen is an implementation question, which is that because these materials, this specialty steel, is to be purchased out of state, there would be a double tax, unintended double tax, if they did not go to considerable trouble to create a joint venture with their suppliers. We have established through consultation with our consultants, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Paul Weiss, that indeed for something south of $500,000, the developer could unilaterally avoid the double tax by, doing these handstands. And we've agreed as I say, a kind of a win-win accommodation that they will pay us the avoided legal costs in lieu of the double tax. So we'll end up about $500,000 ahead of where we would otherwise be if they went through those machinations. Okay, so again, I wanted to ask Jerry to provide some background and explanation with respect to the proposed advertising standard modifications.
The last action item presents proposed revisions to MTA's advertising standards that would limit permitted advertising to commercial ads, ads by government, and paid public service announcements for specified subjects. Advertisements expressing viewpoint messages, regardless of the viewpoint being expressed, would no longer be accepted. The ads that will be affected are a very small part of the speech that would be permitted on MTA's advertising space. In 2014, MTA's total ad revenue was $138 million. Ads that would have been barred under the proposed standards represent less than $1 million of that 2014 revenue. Across the country, transit agencies have been struggling with whether to accept viewpoint advertising that's divisive and can create security concerns. A transit agency's ability to successfully reject these types of political ads depends on primarily whether, for First Amendment purposes, a court considers the advertising space to be a designated public forum or a limited public forum. Because we accept political viewpoint ads, the federal courts have ruled that our advertising space is a designated public forum. This imposes on us a strict scrutiny standard of review where we must show a compelling public interest and use the least restrictive means to further the articulated interest. We've lost all 3 lawsuits when we've prohibited viewpoint ads and been challenged. In 1998, we argued that an ad was defamatory and an invasion of a person's privacy, and we lost. In 2012, we argued that an ad was demeaning, and we lost. And this month, the federal court found our attempt to bar an ad saying that killing Jews is worship that draws us closer to Allah. What's your jihad? Unconstitutional, even though the MTA Director of Security has determined that having this ad running on the back of buses through New York City neighborhoods was reasonably likely to incite or provoke violence. In this last case, MTA allowed all of the other ads from this sponsor to be run. We drew the line when we thought our customers, our employees, and the public were in danger. The judge gave short shrift to those concerns. Under a strict scrutiny standard of review, we have very limited ability to reject any viewpoint ads, even ads that name, disparage, and ridicule in connection with volatile political issues. The proposed revision to the ad policy seeks to convert MTA's advertising space from this designated public forum to a limited public forum. In a limited public forum, regulations on speech must merely be reasonable and not discriminate between speakers based on their viewpoint. So long as a regulation is in fact viewpoint neutral, courts tend to defer to a government determination of what's reasonable, and accordingly they uphold those regulations. Unlike public streets, which will always be a traditional public forum, the courts have determined that transit agencies do have the ability to convert their advertising space from an open public forum to a limited public forum. Other transit agencies that have adopted similar bars on viewpoint speech within the last 3 years for similar reasons include Chicago Transit Authority, SEPTA in Philadelphia, and Los Angeles MTA. To assist MTA's development of the revised advertising standards, we engaged the law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine and have been working with Victor Kovner, who's a nationally recognized First Amendment expert, in addition to previously having been corporation counsel for the City of New York. There was a procurement staff summary voted on earlier relating to this engagement. But let me end with the purpose of this revised advertising policy is to advance MTA's mission. It's not to try to bar any particular viewpoint. We want to provide safe, reliable, efficient public transportation and crossings, and we want to maximize advertising revenues while enabling MTA to exclude disruptive and controversial viewpoint advertising, which adversely affects our mission. I'd be glad to answer any questions anyone has.
The first person is Chuck.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the following statement for the record. Free speech is a cornerstone as we all recognize, of democratic institutions. Hateful speech, with its odious appeal to intolerance, is the incendiary that ignites violence and ultimately destroys free and democratic institutions. The words Judenbengel and Judenhaus and other equally hateful words ring forever in the ears of some of us. Despicable epithets aimed at others in our society, whether based on ethnicity, color, religion, or lifestyle, do not merely offend and demean, they frequently incite and are the precursors of violent action. Hateful speech is not harmless speech. In Northern Ireland, Bosnia, and hateful words accompanied and preceded hateful deeds. While constitutionally protective free speech rights are advocated throughout this nation has simultaneously been alert to its abuses. Oliver Wendell Holmes put it aptly in concluding that the First Amendment did not protect those who scream fire in a crowded theater. The same logic applies to trains, subways, and buses. Sadly, that essential and to most of us obvious precept is not always understood. It is not surprising that those whose every waking moment is protected by a legion of armed United States Marshals have a different perspective on the imminent dangers of hateful speech than the Chassid who makes his way to synagogue at twilight, or the woman attired in a burqa or hijab who goes about her daily pursuits. To them, hateful speech poses a clear and present danger, regardless of the subtle niceties that some may utter. Indeed, our subway platforms have witnessed the bitter fruits of hateful action. Tragically, this is a less civilized society than it once was, and that increasing lack of civility nurtures the venomous. Tragically, there are those acting out of a warped sense of societal wrongs, narcissistic egos, zealotry, or just plain meanness who abuse the privileges of a free society. In 2012, we witnessed a duel between two hateful advertising campaigns posted in our transportation system. A spate of advertisements that despicably defamed the Jewish people were countered by equally hateful assaults on those who follow the tenets of Islam. Both forgot that hateful speech and hateful thoughts ignited the Crusades in which both were butchered. Both forgot that hateful speech fueled the fires of intolerance and murder in Belfast, in Sarajevo, and today is the incendiary that ignites the Middle East, pitting Sunni Muslims against Shiite Muslims and all who happen in their path. In 2012, there was a recognition that this is a transportation agency designed to progress, growth, and a productive society. But ever cautious, we acted gingerly, adding only minimal constraints. Nonetheless, the purveyors of hateful speech would have none of that effort at moderation or of Justice Holmes' wide counsel. Instead, the hate mongers escalated their vitriol. Today, some of us, proponents of free speech, are left by the judiciary with a Hobson's choice when it comes to advertising in transit facilities. Bar all non-commercial, non-public, service opinion speech, or provide a continuing platform for the hate mongers that would tear society apart in order to advance their own demented views. Reluctantly, I champion the former view because continued deterioration of a civilized society is wholly unacceptable. the filth and incendiary vitriol to which we must otherwise subject our riders, including our children, is intolerable and must not continue. To my view, there exists today a clear and present danger to societal needs, to the mission of this agency, and to the public safety and welfare. Someone must speak for and act to preserve what remains of a civilized society. I thank our distinguished chair, exceptionally talented counsel, and the staff of this agency for doing so, and I move the proposal.
From an informational view, who or what is the entity that will determine whether an ad meets this, this type of criteria?
The policy, you'll see, has a process set forth on page 4 of it that essentially has it go through the contractor makes the determination of whether an ad is in the realm of being potentially rejectable under the standards, and then that's presented to the director of...
I'm sorry, Jerry, the contractor would be the person through whom...
Like currently
like
out
CBS,
front, CBS,
yeah, okay.
who does that, and then the director of real estate, and then there is a process for further determination depending on the whether it's a security issue or otherwise.
And in the transit agencies that were mentioned earlier, Los Angeles, MTA, SEPTA, have these policies been challenged by anybody in courts yet?
They, I don't, Peter, do you?
Chicago is the oldest. Come. Use a microphone,
Yeah.
please.
The Chicago Transit Authority changed its policy in 2013, and I'm told that they have not, it has not been challenged, and they have rejected ads because they express political viewpoints, but it is, as
Political viewpoints versus a politician running for re-election or election.
Correct. Chicago Transit went further because, like us, they had existing Federal Circuit courts of appeals decisions that said they were a designated public forum, and they felt if they simply said, we're not going to allow political campaign speech, which is what Boston and Seattle have done, Chicago Transit Authority felt that wouldn't be sufficient to persuade the federal courts that they were really a limited public forum. So they went further. They went as far what we're proposing. For the similar reason, because we have this existing Second Circuit case where the court was very clear that because we accept viewpoint ads, not just political campaign ads, but viewpoint ads, that makes us a designated public forum. Philadelphia, more recently, the SEPTA, I guess is the name of the agency, they changed their policy in the middle of a litigation with this American Freedom Defense Initiative in September, I believe, or October of last year. And then they gave up the lawsuit. They lost, and then they didn't appeal, but going forward, they won't take viewpoint ads. And again, that's not been challenged, as far as I know.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
All right. May we please have a motion to... Go ahead, wait, John. I'm sorry?
We have a motion and a second. May I
Right,
speak
so
now?
would you like to
Okay.
speak? Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate much of the sentiment that my fellow Commissioner Merdler expressed, but I think the cases in the First Amendment jurisprudence disagree quite strongly and quite explicitly with a lot of what you said. And in preparing for the meeting, I've read not only the first case we lost, the second case we lost, but also the appellate case, the New York Magazine case. And although I would disagree with what the advertisements say, I think that the issue is not what I think they should say, or what Commissioner Merdler thinks what they say, or what our esteemed counsel, Mr. Page, and staff thinks they should say, but rather the First Amendment right for protected speech is the sole guide. And in this country, the First Amendment is very precious, and the court cases are quite clear in this area, and that's why I think we keep losing the cases. I'm frustrated upon taking the time to read these cases and upon doing some preparatory work. I think we took the bait and shouldn't have taken a couple of these cases, and we should have run some ads, because it was quite clear when I spent the time on it that we were going to lose. And it is frustrating, because I know the people here are good people, smart people, trying to do their job. But we're on the wrong side of history, we're on the wrong side of constitutional law. And I'd like to add two quotes, which I rarely really want to do, but I think are important to put in context. First is from James Madison, who said, "I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations." Just think about what we're doing now. Gradual and silent encroachment by those in power. So by trying to silence people with whom we may disagree, are we doing that? And the second quote is Ben Franklin. "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech." So these quotes, I think, put it in perspective. And I also want to point out, I think, we are wasting resources. I wish we just had run the ads. The most recent ad we ran, I'm in law, but the most recent ad we ran was so confusing to people who have now read about it, that I think people would have just walked by it and not really fully understood it. And we've given the people who have wanted to pray for the ads more free publicity by challenging them in cases where we just clearly lost and we keep losing. And I'm not so sure, with all due respect, that the new policy is so clear that it's going to triumph, because what you're doing is you're cramping down on political speech. You explicitly say it in your prohibition. You're allowing not-for-profit speech, and whatever we determine that means. 501c3 can be created to do lots of things, but you're prohibiting speech political in nature that address political messages. I don't know if that's a good thing for an arm of government to do, and I'll leave with one final point, supporting what I'm saying about my questioning your new policy and its ability to withstand the standard appropriate. Because in the cases, I'm not so sure, and I don't mean to suggest that I've become a First Amendment expert, in the last week while I've been trying to become a mini expert. But I would say that the quote in the New York Magazine case, in determining the government's intent for a forum, the court has examined not only the characteristics of the forum, which means they've examined the characteristics of the forum, but also the policies by which it governed the use of the forum. So you're trying to change the latter, but the former remains the same. A bus is still a bus. A subway is still a subway. A station is still a station. So you haven't addressed that. So I don't think what you propose, personally, based on what I read, is going to withstand the challenge. And for the reasons I've articulated, I say just run the ads and let's move on.
Well, I agree with much of the sentiment expressed by Commissioner Merdler. And I certainly agree with the idea of it being a Hobson's choice that we're faced with. But I disagree with his conclusion as to what we ought to be doing about it. And I would certainly identify more with the eloquence of my colleague here from Westchester on this issue. We are a public entity. Of a free public forum that has existed for 100 years, by which people have the ability to express themselves whether it be re-elect Roy Goodman, endorsed by the Citizens Union 300 times, or vote, or the MTA Board are a bunch of clowns and don't know what they're doing, or support Move New York a plan because the transit system is going to collapse because we don't have we have a $32 billion capital funding program. We take away from New Yorkers by this proposed action their access to a very valuable public forum that we are in charge of, and as a governmental entity, to take away their First Amendment rights to be able to express those things because a couple of hateful people have played with us for the past couple of years in putting some despicable things out there, and to me does not justify us taking from 8 million other people who don't put those things out there their precious First Amendment rights. And I am really sad to see management attempting to go down this road. I believe very strongly that the antidote to hateful speech is more free speech. I will stand and condemn those who are hateful and wish to divide us. Please, do not deny the good and riders and users of our system the cherished right guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States to be able to express themselves in a free and open manner. Thank you.
Okay, if, okay, we have to move this along because we're now almost a half hour running late. It's going to really ruin the rest of the day for everybody else that comes next. But if anybody hasn't spoken, I think you're entitled to. Mitch?
There's one thing being an attorney and basically a non-practicing attorney for 40 years. You think you know what you're talking about even when you don't know what you're talking about in that regard, which is most of what I do in that context. But having said that, and I'd be the first to admit it, but having said that, the first, and this case is a this situation is a very, very difficult situation. There are points on all sides of it in that regard. However, if there's one thing I've learned, and remember from my law school a long time ago, it's that the First Amendment rights are not unrestricted. There are situations in which everybody's First Amendment rights can be restricted in some regard because of what is intended to be extenuating circumstances. I believe in this situation there are extenuating circumstances. Regardless of whether we agree with what the speech is or not, I believe we owe it to our riders, to our employees, and specifically to our employees, to say to them, we're going to provide you with a safe place in which to work, and we're going to provide our riders with a safe place in which to be transported from one location to another location. I am troubled by the lack of understanding of some people to our responsibility to do that, especially when our Director of Security and other senior management officials very strongly that unrestricted First Amendment rights may provide that type of issue and that type of security and that type of concern. So in my opinion, that says to me these are extenuating circumstances. Circumstances enough to say to those who profess First Amendment rights, which we all guarantee and worship, that there are situations where they can be restricted. We are not restricting those First Amendment rights of anybody who wants to in any other forum. They can do whatever they want to in a variety of other forums, and those forums, I can assure you, exist in 2011 and didn't exist in 1787. other than somebody standing up on the corner in Philadelphia and saying it, and if somebody wants to stand up on the corner in New York on Fifth Avenue and say it, I'm sure their First Amendment rights will be protected in that regard. But in this situation, I feel that we do owe it to our riders and our employees to provide a safe environment, and that's why I will support the resolution, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, each one of us is going to be called upon to vote on this thing, and I'm sure that vote and that decision will not come easily to any one of us. I was reminded by one of my more eloquent colleagues this morning, when I didn't have enough caffeine, that I was one of the people who objected to a former mayor's objection to certain ads on certain buses, importuning the MTA to remove them. I was also reminded, and I didn't need reminding, that the last time we discussed this as a board, I supported the chairman, and I saw it his way in terms of what the First Amendment should be telling us. Here's where I draw the line, Mr. Chairman. When individuals are singled out in ads for scorn and more, I don't think we have an obligation to support that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I see that as my own obligation as a board member. So that's where I draw my personal line. Some judge may decide at the end of the day that the vote we take today, if it's challenged, is wrong. Okay, fine, then we'll all come back and discuss this yet again. But I think I think I have a personal obligation as a board member when I see an individual named in an ad, the target of scorn and more, to offer that individual or those individuals the protection that we can offer as individual board members and as a board. And that's why I'm going to support this proposal. And I do it, you know, I don't do it happily, because this is a difficult thing to do. But something's got to be done to protect people, and I don't think our forum ought to be perverted in any way that endangers individuals. That just is wrong.
Since this is such a significant item, obviously, I think we should take the advertising action item separate and then have another vote on the other normal course of business items. So Chuck wants to speak again, and I know Jonathan raised his hand, but could you really make it quick, because we've got to move forward here.
Mr. Chairman, the premise that my distinguished colleagues operated under was that we are a public forum, and therefore free speech, any speech, is permissible. No man in his right mind or woman would consider entering the United States courthouse in Foley Square and uttering these words there, because they're banned. You can't leaflet in the federal courthouse. It's banned. Why? Because it is by intention not a public forum, and that is exactly the framework of this resolution, is to make sure that we are not, for this purpose, a public forum. Take another example. The New York Times would reject this ad in a nanosecond. And I tell you, as a former counsel to the New York Post, there was a time for sure we would reject that advertisement. Why? Because you can, as Mitch so eloquently put it, and as Freddie so eloquently put it, you can draw a line. And here we seek to draw that line. The line is drawn that we are no longer a public forum in the view of this board for these kind or any kind of opinion matters. Public service announcements are not viewed in that same regard under the case law. Number two, the line is one that you cannot bestir violence by hateful speech. That is a clear and present danger that the Constitution, as Oliver Wendell Holmes and the Second Circuit, in a day where there were other judges in the Second Circuit, specifically ruled. And all this resolution does is try to separate that out. As Freddie aptly observed, if the courts wish to do otherwise, let them do so. But let them do so with the full knowledge that they help make this a less civilized society.
In certain ways, it's unfortunate that I'm here to defend, something that I do find distasteful, but some of the ads and some of the comments. But the First Amendment needs protecting, and I just hate to disagree with my terrific fellow board members, but what you say isn't true just because you say it. The law of what is permitted under the First Amendment is much different from what you guys have outlined. What a forum is, as you're using the term of art, is very different from the colloquial use of the word forum. And all we're talking about is what is a forum and the type of scrutiny to allow that a court would use to determine what we're allowed to restrict and not restrict. And the category, there's a court case, Layman, where the court found the exclusion of political advertising not to determine the nature of the forum. So I don't think we're on such clear ground here. Even with this policy, I predict it'll be challenged and we will lose yet again. The forum is not what you decide it is. The forum is what the First Amendment, as set forth in the cases articulated by the Supreme Court, the Second Circuit, and the federal district courts, say it is. And I just think that we have to be mindful that we don't just get to say what we feel is offensive is allowed and what we feel is not offensive is permitted. It's not, we don't get to determine it. It's the forefathers and the First Amendment and the cases interpreting that do so. And I would want to point out just factually, I wish everyone had read these cases, but with the case we just lost, the most recent case we lost in our continuing effort to restrict free speech, have told us, that we're wrong. The specific ad in question ran in 2 major cities. There were no incidences, no problems. Yet for some reason, and I wish we could go back in time and not object to the ad, for some reason we objected to the ad. And the judge was quite clear in his admonition of us. And, I agree with my colleague who stated that the way to counter something you consider hate speech is to fight back with more speech, not to suppress speech. We are a government. We have the right to do what we think is right, but it should at least comply with the interpretations of the First Amendment. And that's it.
Okay, so just to make it clear, we're going to vote now on the change in the advertising policy, the action item just for the change in advertising policy. May I, please? Been made. Okay, but I want to make it clear that's all this is, okay? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Next, we need a motion, please, for the other action items listed on page 210 of your book. Second, all in favor? Any opposed? The rest of the action items carry. And now we need a vote, please, to... right, thank you very much. Thanks.